Good morning. This hearing is called to order. For the record, the time is 9:15 a.m. The date is Tuesday, July 26, 2022. And this hearing is held both in person at the Public Service Commission with remote appearances by commissioner and party witnesses. I am Commissioner Randy Pinocci, and I will be presiding over this hearing. Appearing with me in person today are President Jim Brown, Vice President Brad Johnson, and Commissioners Tony O'Donnell and Jennifer Fielder are appearing remotely. Commission Attorney Ben Reed will be advising the commission. This is a scheduled public hearing in docket number 2022-04-051 regarding Northwestern's application for authority to operate and acquire the Sleepy Hollow oil and gas system. This hearing will be transcribed by our court reporter, Lori Crutcher. I remind each one of you to speak one at a time. Identify yourselves and speak clearly into the microphone and make sure the blue light's on and it's close to your face. I will now take appearance of counsel. Please introduce yourself and who you represent.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Pinocci, President Brown, Commissioners. My name is Shannon Heim. I'm the Director of Regulatory Counsel for Northwestern Energy.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Pinocci, Commissioners, Jason Brown for the Montana Consumer Council.
Thank you. Before we begin, I note that recesses will occur at convenient times during the hearing as provided in the public notice hearing, and the commission will provide opportunities for the public comment at the beginning of each day of this hearing. Is there any public comment at this time? Senator Butcher.
There we go. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, I'm Ed Butcher, Winifred, Montana, representing this community in Senate District 15 and prior career. I want to speak on the issue of providing natural gas to 178 members of the bankrupt Sleepy Hollow Gas Company. This is critical for the customers who were sold on the proposal to convert their fuel oil, propane, and other heating systems to natural gas by this company before the wells they were drilling proved viable. This is a case of a company getting a horse before the cart. They had an infrastructure in place before they realized they were unable to supply the gas from their wells and had to purchase the gas.
Senator Butcher, you need to slow down just a bit, please.
Oh, okay.
We have a recorder.
Okay, sorry about that. The investors established 3 companies during their operation, which were formed as a result of 3 bankruptcies from incompetent management. The Winifred customers endured these periods of chaos without other energy options and faced periods of time with no safety officers on site, which were very dangerous and potentially deadly situations for the families of my community. This wildcatting company began as Great Plains Exploration, which filed bankruptcy after a couple of years and reincorporated as Tatanka Gas Company for a couple more years before filing bankruptcy for a second time, and then reincorporating as the current company of Sleepy Hollow Gas Company. During these times, there were extended periods of time with no safety officers on site, during which there were at least 2 serious gas leaks. One time, my son, who was a member of the local volunteer fire department, and of course they had no training on addressing gas leaks, was getting his mail at the post office at about midnight when he observed a broken gas line between the hotel and grocery store, which was flaring gas 10 to 15 foot flames between the 2 buildings. It was 0 degrees and no one was out on the street, so he rushed down to the bar, which was open. And fortunately, that was during a period of time when the gas company had John Carlstrom hired locally, and he rushed down to shut off the gas before the buildings ignited, which would have burned down the entire block. The second incident occurred when the telephone company cut an reportedly improperly buried gas line. And during that instance, there were no local safety officer, and they had to reportedly call the PSC since the company manager who lived in Lewistown, 40 miles away, did not answer the phone number. And he was finally located, and then he made the hour trip to Winifred to shut off the gas service before there was a catastrophe of some kind. During this current bankruptcy, the situation has been in chaos, with customers not being billed, and more critically, there were no safety officers in the community. If there had been a gas leak during the past 6 months, a number of people could have been killed. This was totally unacceptable situation. To compound the problem, a $50 million school has been under construction this past year, and an accident could have been catastrophic, with hundreds of workers on site and no safety officer in the community. The community and Sleepy Hollow customers are appreciative for the PSC stepping in and dealing with the bankruptcy court, and especially the Northwest Energy considering taking over this operation and covering a very dangerous situation. This was occurring during the past winter, and the PSC would have been forced to shut off the gas for safety reasons. The 178 customers, would have been in a critical situation with few options. The Winifred community would urge the commission to expedite the transfer of this gas company to Northwest Energy, which is the most logical company to take over the operation, since they were supplying the gas to the bankrupt company and can bring stability to the customers. This can be a win-win for Northwest Energy and their current customers, since they can simply acquire an operating structure and a very appreciative customer base. We would hope that the PSC will look at the rate structure also and adjust it to reflect the acquisition investment, and that the current customers were paying an inflated rate since Sleepy Hollow had been purchasing gas, which they in turn retailed to the customers. Most important, we don't need another fly-by-night company taking over this operation. So it's logical for Northwest Energy to be the one on site to assume this responsibility. Thank you for your attention in expediting this transfer and operating system, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Butcher. May we have your written comments, or do you have copies for us? Thank you. Do we have other public comment?
Good morning, commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Doug Flement from Lewistown. I'm the representative for Montana House District 29, which encompasses Fergus County and Petroleum counties, and northern Fergus County, especially in the town of Winifred, where this gas line exists. I'd like to open by saying, on behalf of Senator Bartel and myself, we really appreciate what Northwestern Energy has done to date as far as taking over the delivery of the gas to 178 customers. I won't repeat a lot of the things that Senator Butcher explained because they stand to reason. We also really appreciate the fact that the Public Service Commission is working diligently and expediting this process along with Northwestern Energy to take over this gas line. It's a common sense, very easy to understand. We realize, of course, that Northwestern Energy does have quite a bit of expense in this, both with personnel on the legal side and with maintenance people. And it is a large undertaking for them to take over this gas line, especially from the liability side, which they had no participation in constructing, maintaining, or training the previous employees, which Sleepy Hollow had. Bringing their people in and starting this up is very important, and it just makes total common sense that we allow Northwestern Energy to take this over. And again, deeply thank them for the opportunity. And all of the consumers that Ed had mentioned, including there's several businesses on this gas line, and of course the Winifred School is on it. And the fact that there has never been a loss of delivery to gas to these people throughout this process in bankruptcy is very important, and we really appreciate what you've done. And thank you, commissioners, for working forward and expediting this process. We realize that anytime there's a bankruptcy involved, time is never of the essence. And thank you for moving forward with this, and thank you, Northwestern Energy.
Thank you, Representative. Do you have any written comment in writing to hand to us? Just curious.
Oh, I was just speaking off the cuff.
Okay, just had to ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment in the room before we go to online public comment? All right, seeing none, let's see what we have for online public comment. Mr. Bartel, can you hear us? Senator Bartel,
Yes, yes, I can.
please state your name and
Good morning,
from.
PSC Commission and Chair Brown. I'm current state senator in Senate District 15, which is where Sleepy Hollow Gas Company is in my district. Last name spelled Bartel. I won't repeat what Representative Clement and Senator Butcher have said, so I'll shorten up mine. But I am in full support of Northwestern Energy and Granton Authority to take over the Sleepy Hollow Gas Company. Northwestern has a proven track record that they will maintain the essential gas service for all the customers that are stretched out between Winifred, Montana and Lewistown. And I believe they'll do that well, just like they do with many other citizens and businesses in the state of Montana. Northwestern, I believe, also is well positioned through its technical expertise and also because of its current nearby infrastructure supplying Lewistown and the surrounding area, will be able to continue to operate the Sleepy Hollow system flawlessly. So I would hope that the PSC would grant Northwestern the authority. And again, I want to thank Ed Butcher for the history that he gave to the PSC, and also I want to thank the PSC and Northwest Energy for all of their due diligence and work to make sure that these folks did not lose their gas in the middle of the winter. So I applaud you all and thank you very much, and I hope that we can get Northwestern on board and grant them authority. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Other public comment?
Yes, this is Travis Wilson, Mayor of Winifred. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The city has approved a franchise agreement with Northwest Energy. Senator Butcher pretty much summed up everything that we were going to talk about, and the city of Winifred is in full support of Northwest Energy. So I want to thank you again for your time.
Thank you, sir. Other public comment? Seeing none. Are there any informational questions before we begin? Are there any formal pre-hearing matters such as requests for accommodating witnesses or evidentiary motions?
Good morning, Chairman Panocci, Commissioners. I do have a few things, just a few preliminary matters. We do have one witness who is appearing by Zoom today. Eric Silver, the receiver, and his counsel, Rob Barr, are both participating by Zoom by agreement of counsel. So hopefully that is not an issue. Just want to flag it. The other issue, we have an agreement amongst the parties for the commission to take administrative notice of a few other Sleepy Hollow documents that are, I think, informative to the docket, but not necessarily being offered as exhibits by Northwestern. So if I could just identify those, that would perhaps be helpful. The first one is the Sleepy Hollow tariff. It was offered in docket 2011.04.35. It's also exhibit 5 to our application, our initial application in this docket. The tariff, you would note, the cost is propane minus 20% is the cost that Sleepy Hollow was assessing to customers. The second document is the most recent compliance filing that Sleepy Hollow made. They filed it in early 2021, covering operational year 2020. The PSC staff memo regarding the order to show cause has a lot of background and information from staff perspective that would be valuable in our estimation to staff. That was in the Sleepy Hollow docket, which is this one, 2022.04.051. And then the order to show cause itself, which is number 7833, just to round out the docket. And I don't believe there are any objections to those.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. No objection.
Thank you. Any matters MCC'd like to bring up, Mr. Brown?
Not at this point. Thank you.
Chairman Panochi, would you like to deal with exhibits and the discovery that we had noted in our pre-hearing memo that we would be offering into the record?
Should we enter that now? There's no objections. Let's enter it in the record now.
Okay, so let's maybe take them one at a time, just as a group. So the discovery that the MCC had propounded to Northwestern, we would move to put in the discovery and all of those attachments.
No objection.
Okay.
And then Northwestern would further move to include all of the exhibits. We can either do this by witness, it's at your discretion, or we can move the entire list of exhibits that have been identified and provided in advance by Northwestern Energy.
Which would you prefer?
I think it's easier just to move them all at once. And then if there's anything additional, we can deal with it as we go.
Okay, let's do that.
No objection.
We have a list and a binder for you of all of them. It's basically going to be 1 through 21, NWE 1 through NWE-21.
I'd like to swear in witnesses online and any in the room that may be present.
I don't know if Mr. Silver is online right now. His testimony will come a little bit later in the process, but we do have our other 2 witnesses here in person.
Well, let's swear them in and proceed.
Eric is on, so he can be sworn right now also.
I will now swear in all witnesses which are currently present in the room and online. Please stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you swear the testimony you are about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I don't think we heard him online.
I think I did hear
You
Mr.
did?
Silver. Do you
Okay.
want to repeat that, Mr. Silver?
I do swear that.
Okay. Thank you. You may be seated. Counsel, I note that if any of your witnesses are not currently in the room or appearing remotely, that they will need to be sworn in before they are permitted to provide testimony.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a quick note? We do have 3 additional witnesses that are on standby. We've moved all of the exhibits, so I don't think any of them will be necessary, but we can swear them if that comes up.
Okay, we'll proceed that way if we need to. Opening statements. We will begin the hearing at this, as this hearing is on Northwestern's motion. This is their opportunity to make an opening statement. Please do so.
Good morning, Chairman Panochi, Commissioners. My name is Shannon Heim. I'm the Director of Regulatory Corporate Counsel for Northwestern Energy. From the outset, I'd like to recognize the unique nature of this docket and the hearing that we're having today. Northwestern appreciates the flexibility that's been shown by the Commission, its staff, and the Montana Consumer Council to consider the important issue before us today. Let's talk about why we're here. Sleepy Hollow Oil and Gas first offered natural gas service in Montana in January 2011. It operated a natural gas gathering and distribution system in and around the community of Winifred, Montana. The company was started by Richard Osborne and run primarily out of the office of the parent company, OzAir in Ohio. Northwestern's understanding is that Mr. Osborne intended to drill sufficient natural gas wells to supply its retail business and sell the excess to Northwestern Energy for a profit. Reality did not meet this expectation. Mr. Osborne filed bankruptcy in mid-2017. He died on June 4th, 2021, which further complicated the administration of Sleepy Hollow's utility business. During the course of the bankruptcy case, the bankruptcy trustee sought an order from the Ohio Court of Common Pleas that OzAir, which owns Sleepy Hollow, be dissolved and the assets liquidated as appropriate. The court appointed Eric Silver as the receiver for OzAir and tasked him with the liquidation of assets on December 27th, 2021. The last executive of OzAir retired at the end of 2021, leaving no paid employees to maintain the natural gas system. The record in the docket demonstrates that Northwestern and the receiver negotiated, and this commission approved, a limited operating agreement. Northwestern and the receiver subsequently negotiated an asset purchase agreement for the acquisition of Sleepy Hollow's assets for a nominal amount, $1, to prevent the customers from losing critical natural gas service. Northwestern understands that the receiver will request the asset purchase agreement be approved by the Ohio court on an expedited basis, although the timing of the approval is solely within the discretion of the court, not the receiver and not Northwestern. Sleepy Hollow's last required compliance filing was submitted to the commission for operations in 2020. Despite commission efforts to bring Sleepy Hollow into compliance with the relevant state and federal regulations, Sleepy Hollow is facing an order to show cause. Sleepy Hollow last paid Northwestern for its wholesale natural gas supply on September 27th, 2021. The evidence will demonstrate that Sleepy Hollow is now delinquent to Northwestern for the amount of approximately $85,000. The commission has a decision to make. Northwestern stepped in to operate the system and to give the commission the opportunity and the time to weigh the evidence and make a determination of whether or not this acquisition of assets by Northwestern is in the public interest. Northwestern's operation of the system is an interim measure that cannot continue indefinitely. Absent Northwestern's action to operate the system, it would have been shut down by now. Operating the system benefited everyone. It gave Northwestern time to conduct due diligence and examine the system. It gave the customers of Sleepy Hollow the needed stability of a utility. The receiver obtained some needed financial resources, and the commission received this opportunity to make an informed decision. Today, the commission must weigh the benefits of preserving natural gas service for Sleepy Hollow's approximately 140 customers against the cost of remedying operational defects in the system, the bad debt incurred for gas and operation of the system, and potentially the liens against the easements to operate that system. Northwestern believes there is a strong public interest argument for it to acquire the assets and keep the system operational. Sleepy Hollow's system currently serves approximately 140 customers with about 150 meters. These customers include the local school, small businesses, the local church, and the town of Winifred itself. If the system shuts down, they will all face an expensive transition to propane. Balanced against this public interest is the reality that the utility cannot bear the costs involved in this case without being able to pass them along to the larger natural gas customer base. The evidence will show that as much as $720,000 may be at issue. The detailed decisions related to rate recovery, for example, a review of the prudence and incurring any particular cost, will be resolved in the upcoming rate case and honestly future rate cases. However, Northwestern strongly urges the commission to weigh the likely costs in their public interest determination. Surely at some point, the costs are just too high to justify the expense, but only the commission can decide where that point lies. Northwestern does not expect the system to generate enough revenue to cover the cost to operate it. If Northwestern does not acquire the assets, the system will shut down. I'd like to preview the evidence that you'll hear in today's hearing. Northwestern will offer 3 witnesses to assist the commission in its decision today. First, the commission will hear from Mr. Jason Merkel, the General Operations and Construction Manager for Northwestern. Mr. Merkel and his staff have conducted an examination of the Sleepy Hollow system and conducted due diligence to identify what needs to be done to transition the system from a natural gas gathering and delivery system to a retail natural gas distribution system. He will provide the commission his understanding of the work and its potential cost. Mr. Merkel will also discuss the work done to date by Northwestern to operate the system. Mr. Merkel's testimony and evidence informs both sides of the public interest discussion, the benefit to Sleepy Hollow customers and the likely financial cost to all Northwestern natural gas customers. Second, the commission will hear from Ms. Lisa Perry, Northwestern's Manager of Community Relations. Ms. Perry will discuss her 3 separate visits to Winifred, her interactions with the leadership of the town of Winifred and the community at large. She will also describe her role in conducting due diligence related to the customer base and billing matters, as well as Northwestern's communication plans related to the operation and eventual acquisition of the system, of course, upon commission approval, court approval, and meeting of the conditions in the asset purchase agreement. Ms. Perry's testimony informs the commission's understanding of the public interest of the community and the current customers of Sleepy Hollow, as well as the potential costs related to the resolution of existing liens against the Sleepy Hollow easements. Third, the commission will hear from Eric Silver, the Sleepy Hollow receiver. Northwestern appreciates the efforts of the receiver to do the right thing and to try to transition these customers to permit them to retain their service. The Sleepy Hollow assets provide as little financial benefit to the receiver estate as they do to Northwestern, so this effort is particularly appreciated. Mr. Silver is represented by Robert Barr, who is also on the Zoom and will participate as appropriate during Mr. Silver's testimony. Northwestern expects Mr. Silver to explain the receiver's role in the disposal of the Sleepy Hollow assets, his interaction with Sleepy Hollow customers, and the lack of any other viable options for continued operation of the system. Mr. Silver's testimony provides valuable context for the commission's public interest determination. Northwestern has 3 additional witnesses on standby if necessary. Roy Ishkanian, Manager of Lands and Permitting, did all of the easement work and the work in gathering and understanding the liens. Beth Steinmetz is the Environmental Compliance Specialist who wrote the environmental review that has been entered into evidence and can answer any specific questions about it. And Aaron Fox is Corporate Counsel for Contracting and worked on the asset purchase agreement and the limited operating agreement if there are specific questions to that. We do not believe the testimony from these additional witnesses will be necessary, but given the unusual nature of this docket, Northwestern wants to be ready to provide the commission and the MCC any and all information that the commission may require to evaluate the competing public interest concerns at issue in this docket. To conclude, Northwestern stepped up. We stepped up to provide operational support to Sleepy Hollow and to allow the commission the time, space, and information it needed to make this decision. We have done our best in cooperation with the commission staff, the receiver, and the Montana Consumer Council to provide the information we believe important to making this decision.
Thank you for that opening statement. MCC, Mr. Brown, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. And for the record, my name is Jason Brown, Montana Consumer Council, and I thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I'll keep my opening brief because I'm not taking a position today on Northwestern's acquisition of these assets. Like you, I'm eager to hear the evidence that is presented today. This has been an unusual proceeding, a very truncated process, and I think it's safe to say that we've not had a normal fact-finding process that you would see in a contested case, for example. It sounds like Northwestern is asking the commission to make the decision whether it acquires these assets, but I would submit that Northwestern is in the best position to know whether it's appropriate to acquire these assets. And I guess my real ask today of the commission is to, if you do approve this, to defer all rate making issues to the rate case. That would include issues related to cost allocation. And that's because there's simply not an adequate record in this case to make any rate making decisions. For example, which existing customer classes or new classes should be responsible for the acquisition costs here. I know that in Northwestern's pre-hearing memo, one of the issues potentially is whether all costs will be borne equally by all of Northwestern's natural gas customers. Again, there's rate making issues involved in which customers we're talking about there. that should be deferred. There simply hasn't been a fair process or a full record on any of the rate making issues. And there's always different buckets of costs in a rate case. In that case, you'd be looking at buckets of actual costs that may end up in different rates. There's several different rates that Northwestern Gas customers pay. And that's how rates are normally set. So again, my ask would be that this commission doesn't bind itself or that commission that hears the rate case as to any rate making decisions. I think it'd be unfair to do so based on the existing record. It'd be unfair to Northwestern's existing gas customers to make those kind of decisions in this case. And it would be a violation of due process, I think. In Northwestern's opening, there was a mention of the cost of conversion to propane. And I think it's not fair to ask this commission to consider costs when I don't believe there's any evidence in this record about what the costs of converting to propane would be. So I don't know how you balance or weigh that in this case. So again, I think that's a reason to defer all cost issues, all rate making issues to the rate case. And I would just note, because I'm aware that the contract that was freely negotiated includes some language about this commission's approvals. But I think to the extent the contract might require something else, it should be renegotiated. The contract doesn't limit your authority, of course, and it was negotiated by Northwestern. I think you just heard them say that the asset purchase agreement was negotiated by them. So I don't think these contracts should be used by utilities as a way to curtail or limit or box in this commission or what it can do. So if you hear anything about that, I guess that would be my position on that does not limit what you can do and should not limit what you do. And specifically, this commission should defer all rate making issues. So again, I'm excited to hear the evidence today and have been kind of learning in real time a lot of the facts of this acquisition right up till yesterday. Every time there's a filing, I feel like I learn something new. But it's not my intention today in this case to take a real technical approach to the evidence. This is an unusual proceeding. And so I think so long as the commission does defer the rate making issues and doesn't decide any of those issues, that it's fully capable of sorting through the evidence that comes in today and what's relevant to the decisions here today. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to hearing the evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. This is a unusual situation for sure, and I would be careful not to be limited. It could be the first of its kind in the history of this country. Ms. Heim, you may proceed with your case in chief. Before you begin, can you please let us know how many witnesses must be called today?
We believe that we'll get through all 3 witnesses today.
Okay. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Pinochi. Commissioners, Northwestern calls Jason Merkel. Good morning, Mr. Merkel.
Good morning.
That level. Great. Can you please state your name and spell the last for the record?
My name is Jason Merkel. Last name Merkel.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed with Northwestern Energy.
And what is your position at Northwestern?
I'm the general manager of operations and construction for Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska.
What does that position entail?
I oversee the operations, both electric and gas, in the 3 states, actually 4 states that we operate. We also operate in Wyoming, serving Yellowstone National Park. Oversee the management team and the gas and electric teams that operate all of the infrastructure, both transmission, electric, distribution, electric, and gas distribution.
How many people report to you?
Approximately 100 or 580.
Can you give us a little bit about your background regarding natural gas infrastructure?
Yeah, actually, before coming to Northwestern Energy, years ago, I actually worked on the High Line, did some rough necking, perforating oil and gas wells. Worked on some workover rigs before, and while going to college. After that, upon coming to Northwestern Energy, I actually started when Northwestern Energy was Montana Power, and Montana Power owned our production fields largely in the Cut Bank and Shelby areas. I started employment with Montana Power up there, working on the gathering systems for the production wells and operating the storage wells that are currently part of our transmission system. After being up there for approximately 4 years, I moved into the distribution aspects with Montana Power, and now Northwestern Energy. While with distribution, I engineered distribution systems, extensions, and then later went into management.
Are you familiar, Mr. Merkel, with Sleepy Hollow Oil and Gas?
I am.
And when did Sleepy Hollow first come to your attention?
Around 2010, when there was discussion of connecting to our transmission system to put in for us, which would be a purchase station where we were expecting to receive gas from Sleepy Hollow. Shortly thereafter, there was a discussion that particular station was again set up to be a purchase station. So we were expecting to receive gas. And shortly after its installation and construction by both parties, we had some assets to build. They had some assets to build. In order to do that, we had to adjust those assets to actually provide gas. And we've been operating in that mode on a pseudo temporary basis since then.
Did Sleepy Hollow ever provide Northwestern measurable natural gas?
Not to my knowledge, not through that Lewistown purchase station.
Fair enough. Mr. Merkel, can you please turn to exhibit NWE1?
I have it here.
Perfect. Can you please identify that?
That's the limited operating agreement that we signed into in the April timeframe in order to operate the system in behalf of Sleepy Hollow.
What's your understanding of the services provided by Northwestern under the limited operating agreement?
I would coin it as doing what's necessary to keep the public safe. And that's pretty much the boundaries of the operating agreement. It's to respond to locates, any response, gas leaks, those type of things. It does not include construction related activities, new construction or anything like that. So we're kind of the holders of the current assets is probably the best way I would describe it. And the number one purpose is for public safety, as I see it.
Can you please turn to NWE7 and identify that document?
Thank you. I have it here. It's this is actually the list of the customers, and along that, it was a list provided to our local staff in order to perform manual meter reads. We've read the meters. I believe we've read all of the meters twice at this point through the limited operating agreement.
How would you evaluate the job Northwestern has done to date for the customers of Sleepy Hollow?
Well, I'm pretty proud of this company, and I've been with it for 29 years, and we've provided the same thing we do for all of our gas customers. That's professionalism, integrity, concern for public safety, and we take our job very seriously. And compliance to federal regulations is key on our list, and that's what that system's been lacking.
Are you aware of any viable alternatives to Northwestern's acquisition of the Sleepy Hollow assets?
Well, there's always options. The alternatives could be, do nothing. And if we do nothing, that would mean that those assets would be shut off, not used, and those customers would have to find alternative sources to their energy needs that's currently being served by gas. Other than the Northwestern option, to my knowledge, that would be the only other viable option. As I've personally investigated the system and went through what you would have to do to make that system that was constructed not as a distribution system, and that's key. It was constructed as a gathering system, and it was constructed to serve wet gas to all of those customers between the Missouri River north of Winifred, and even some customers on the boundary of Lewistown. It was meant to serve wet gas. So there's not enough customers to make the operating costs viable. So I've heard the testimony of others or the comments of others, and I totally agree that there's no entity other than Northwestern Energy that could go in, operate the system affordably for those customers and do it in accordance with federal regulations to operate a distribution system.
Mr. Merkel, do you personally or Northwestern as a company have experience converting customers to propane?
We do actually, yeah. We've had customers. I told you that I've had experience with our production fields in the north, and we have remnants of those production fields scattered from Cut Bank to in the Havre area. So we do have some experience serving customers off of wet gas systems. And in a depleted gas field, the water concentrations become greater as the wells deplete, and water becomes more and more of an increasing issue. We've had customers on vintage gathering systems that it just got to the point where it wasn't safe, it wasn't possible. It caused so much work to go in and work on those gas systems that it just wasn't affordable anymore. In those situations, we actually converted customers to propane systems.
Can you just give a brief description of the process of converting to propane?
Because gas and natural gas and propane are different BTU concentration, different densities. One's lighter in air, one's heavier than air. The appliances have to be converted for those differences if they're able to be. If they're not able to be, you would have to purchase new appliances. You can use service lines, those type of things. Regulators need to be changed because, again, for those differences, one operates at 7 inches of water column. on a typical residence. One operates at 11 inches of water column. So you'd have to convert, in summary, you'd have to convert appliances to operate on propane, or change out the appliances itself. Regulators, certainly you'd have to install a propane tank. Service facilities, pipe facilities could be reused.
Mr. Merkel, if Northwestern does not acquire the natural gas asset and these customers have to convert either to electric or propane, who bears that cost?
The customer would have to.
Okay, let's take a step back and talk big picture about the Sleepy Hollow system. If you could please turn to Exhibit 2. This is NWE 2, the asset purchase agreement.
I have that before me.
Can you tell us big picture what Northwestern is acquiring?
There's many of the assets that were part of oil and gas that they're not necessary or needed as part of the delivery system. Again, this is a gathering system. So in order for us to take it over, we're taking over a gathering system that it would be Northwestern Energy's interest to convert it to a distribution system.
Mr. Merkel, I apologize for interrupting, but can you explain that a little bit more? What does a gathering system do versus a distribution system?
There's a map before you. And at the top side of that, very top side of that map, where it says map of system.
And can I, for the record, this is NWE
Exhibit
4 is this map.
At the very top side of that, you have the Missouri River. And just south of that, and on the south edge of the Missouri River, sprinkled throughout, there was plans to have gas wells there and both east and west of Christine, which is south of Winifred. Those gas wells were intended to enter into a gathering system that then proceeds to the very south end of that map where Lewistown sits. It would serve customers along the way, and the excess gas would enter into our pipeline, our transmission quality pipeline at Lewistown. In order for that to happen, at least by the assets, the way they're situated, Sleepy Hollow was intending to provide, again, wet gas to all of those customers. There was a dehydrator and compressor station at the very south end at our purchase station.
Mr. Merkel, what is wet gas? We're going to define as we go so that we stay on the same page.
In order for gas to be transmission quality, it has to meet some parameter of BTU concentration. And it also has to achieve no greater than 4 pounds per million cubic feet of gas of water. It has to be less than that to be transmission quality. For us to accept gas at Lewistown as dry gas or gas that we would deliver to our customers through our transmission and our distribution system, it had to be less than 4 pounds of water. The dehydrator that they had situated at the purchase station at Lewistown, the purpose of that equipment was to actually remove the water from the gas to make it transmission quality gas. It was literally within feet of our purchase station. So that would suggest that every other customer from the Missouri River to the north, including Winifred, Hilder, Christine, all the way down to Lewistown, any customers that were connected to their system would be served as wet gas. The problem with wet gas is that you need to expect that you could receive water slugs or natural gasoline, products of oil. So that system has within its components, it has drip systems. Drips are an expansion of the pipe, if you will, that allows water and gas to flow through this expansion in hopes that the liquids will fall out into that drip, into that expansion, and the gas will keep flowing by. So on almost every service, other than the services in Winifred, there's some sort of a drip system. The problem with the drip system is that it's a metal system and it's isolated by the plastic pipelines that serve it. That creates what's called islanded steel. Islanded steel require, by code, additional inspections. If you're going to operate with drips within your system and you're going to meet the requirements of CFR 49.192, the DOT code, you're going to be out there inspecting or creating cathodic systems to be able to protect those steel systems. Obviously, that hasn't been done.
Okay, so let's stay in the big picture, because we do want to talk about what needs to be done on a project by project basis to get the system compliant. But if you look at NWE 4, which is the map of the system, can you explain to the commission what the X's are and how that denotes what Northwestern is acquiring and what we are not acquiring?
I can. So if you look at those X's, I'm seeing them from here. I think there's 5 of them. You'll see some blue lines, you'll see some green lines. The blue and the green are today what are existing pipeline facilities owned by Sleepy Hollow. What we did was, when we did our assessment, is we don't need all of that pipeline to serve the 140 some customers, 150 meters that are on this system. So our intentions would be is to reduce the system to only what is needed to serve those customers so that we can reduce the ongoing operating costs that would be required by having more feet in your distribution system that aren't necessarily needed. So the blue lines that you see on that map, they would be abandoned gathering line that actually reach out to essentially the locations of where the Sleepy Hollow is intending to have their drilling and well campaign.
So, Mr. Merkel, on NWE 4, the map, the wells are marked with stars, or at least the wells that Northwestern is aware of. Is Northwestern acquiring any of the wells?
No, we are not.
Why is that?
Well, they don't produce. That's the key. If they did produce, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. And there's also a question about the way they were drilled and risk and liabilities that they may have to the company. Essentially, they're no value. Why would we take them?
So to put it another way, is it fair to say that the receiver estate is retaining all of the liability and the assets that are being excluded from Northwestern's acquisition?
I will tell you, Northwestern's not taking that liability.
Fair enough. Okay, do you have anything else on NWE4 the commission should know?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay. Have you personally inspected the Sleepy Hollow system?
I have.
If you could please turn to exhibit NWE5. So we actually have two documents that are NWE5. There's a 5A, which I think we actually want to talk about and focus on a little bit more to demonstrate some of the issues that we had been getting into, the stranded steel, et cetera.
I have both.
Okay. At your discretion, will you talk us through what in your estimation needs to be done?
Again, this is a gathering system, and I would refer first to 5A. I talked about those drip systems and drip components. And you can see on, at least for me, what is the second page. At the top, it says page 2 of 9 is a good example of the drip that's installed for any location, again, outside of Winifred. What they did do for Winifred is they created one of these systems, and actually there's a few other locations where there were enough customers congregated that they went with kind of a farm tap arrangement where they did one of these. The other thing that I haven't mentioned that is a consideration is the lack of odorization. That's another requirement for a distribution system, and the safe operation of a distribution system is to have odorized gas. So in a gathering system like this, the way it's constructed, you would have to have a number of odorization injection points. The problem with that on a wet gas system, you almost need it very near to each house, because it on its own can actually drop out, like the liquids that are contained within the gas.
Jason, can you share with the commission what is the value of odor in the gas?
It's to give it that rotten egg smell that the public knows and recognizes, and so if you do have a leak without odorization, gas does have an odor, at least for those that have been around it, but it's certainly not as recognizable as the odorized gas that's used in transmission and distribution systems across the nation.
Okay, sorry for that aside. So let's keep talking about the projects that need to be done to bring the system into code.
Well, these documents that are in 5A, many of them contain the standard at which the system was constructed at each service. And in each one of these standards, there's components that would just simply be removed to remove that isolated steel. There's no need for it in a dry gas distribution system. So you would just remove it. You would connect the plastic entering these components to the plastic at the exit of these components. And you would essentially just pipe straight through them and remove them.
Can you speak just briefly, for those of us inexpert in this, the value of having all plastic and bypassing and removing the steel? I assume there's a safety benefit to that.
Well, again, I touched on it briefly, but I'm probably not the expert about this. I know it from an operating standpoint, but if you have islanded steel, that steel acts as an anode cathode relationship, and it will corrode quickly over time. Whenever we have steel on our systems, both our steel pipelines and islanded steel, we connect anodes, and you can see there's within even this page 2, you can see that the standard calls for one of these anodes, which in itself will slow the corrosion, maybe even prevent corrosion. But you need to periodically inspect that pipe to soil voltage created by that cathodic system is appropriately protecting the islanded steel.
Is it fair to categorize the islanded steel as points of failure in the Sleepy Hollow system?
It very well could be. And, you know, we've done due diligence, but there's nearly 80 miles of assets that are buried. So I can't confirm by their construction practices and the problems that they went through, you can understand why there would be doubt that anodes were applied appropriately where they should be. Not to mention, they're not needed. So you've got this maintenance requirement to go out at some periodic basis to validate that you have proper cathodic protection. And you're maintaining that appropriate cathodic protection.
Okay. If you could turn to NWE 5, the pictures and description, is there, I don't want to belabor this, but these were some of the things that you saw out there. Is there anything that you want to call to the commission's attention?
Well, these, again, there's compressor stations, you know, it was a gathering system. I know I'm repeating that a bunch, but it's in part the problem in taking over these assets and then in turn operating it like a distribution system, like it should be, like it has been operating forever since its inception. It was intended to be in gathering. It was designed to be gathering, but it's been operated as distribution, other than I've found no records where they met anything in the form of the requirements of CFR 49 Part 192, which are the requirements, if you will, for utilities to safely operate a natural gas system, distribution system. In these, you'll see a number of compressors. There was a compressor station. There were essentially 3 locations. And I should back up. There was 4. There's one compressor that's actually north of the river.
Mr. Merkel, can you tell us, what does a compressor do in a gathering system?
I can. The natural gas wells, the way this system was intended to operate, I don't know what shut-in pressure they intended to have on those gas wells, or even the flow pressure for those gas wells. But I do know the way the system was designed, that they were going to operate at roughly 100 pounds between Winifred and Christine. And then they were going to operate at 200 pounds from Christine to Lewistown. And then our operating pressure can range anywhere from, I believe it's 400 to 700. Don't quote me on the top end of that, but roughly. So it's going up in pressure as it goes towards its intended delivery point, which was Lewistown. So what they need to do is if the wells, like many of the wells in that region, operate once they're flowing, actually operate at less than 100 pounds. They operate at something like, by our experience on our system just north of there, they probably flow at 35 to 40 pounds on it, which is a good well. So a compressor would take that lower suction pressure as suction to a compressor, and it just simply pumps it up to a higher discharge pressure. So they had a compressor at Winifred that would take suction off the wells, and then they would pressure that up to approximately 100 pounds. And then at Christine, that compressor would take suction at 100 pounds and pump it up to 200 pounds. And then they had another compressor at Lewistown that would have to pump it up at some pressure to overcome whatever our operating pressure was in the transmission line, or they wouldn't deliver us anything, right? So the purpose of compressors are just simply to raise the pressure of the operating system. And that was their design. However, since roughly 2010, 2011, we've been providing them gas, and we regulated that gas from a 400 to 700 pound system down to about 50 pounds. And the whole system has been roughly operating at about 50 pounds for its life.
So, Mr. Merkel, so just so I understand this, the compressors are in the system as designed to push the gas gathered from the wells south to meet the retail load, but also to then sell it to Northwestern.
That was the design of the system, yes.
Okay. Can you talk about the problem with having compressors in a system that is a distribution system with the gas flowing the other direction?
They're just not needed. We have a high enough pressure at our transmission system to be able to, even if we have a high enough pressure on our transmission system to serve the system as a distribution system. Anything less than 400 pounds, because it's a plastic system, it's going to have some, absolute maximum. I have no records to understand what the MAOP, which is the maximum allowable operating pressure, if Sleepy Hollow ever established that to what you see in these documents 5A, I wouldn't know that. All I can tell you is it's operated at 50 pounds, and the components in the system can easily handle 50 pounds. But if we take it over, I'm sure in working with the PSC staff, we would establish that is the MAOP on the system, because that's the only pressure we can prove at this point.
Well, and that actually raises a good issue related to one of the requests by Northwestern that the commission not take enforcement action.
Yeah, there's still a lot. I mean, we've done due diligence on the system, but there's still a lot that we don't know. We've responded to a couple of leaks already. One leak was actually on a compressor system at Winifred. The way it was left to flow through the compressor, we've since removed that so it doesn't flow through the compressor. I'm not sure why it was left like that, but that's the way it was left. And a leak formed. We dealt with that. There were some other leaks down towards Lewistown. What happened in the summer months when there's no flow, as the weather started to warm up in the June timeframe, and there was no flow on the system pressure would rise a bit because you have no load. to hold that pressure down. And as that pressure rose, there were some reliefs that were actually set at 50 pounds, and we were popping a few reliefs. So we backed the system down to 4 or 5 pounds, to about 44 pounds in order to prevent that from happening. And then we did change out a couple of reliefs as well.
So can you please sum up briefly why you want to remove the compressors? If they're not needed,
If they're not needed, they're just a maintenance issue. They're a risk, they're a liability. They're just a component that can create a failure that we don't need.
okay, thank you. Can you please turn to exhibit NWE 6? Can you identify that, please?
Yes, this is a spreadsheet that my staff and I developed in order to track the various items that we felt we needed to deal with in order to work towards achieving compliance on the Sleepy Hollow system. Did you want me to go through these line by line?
I do.
Thought you might. The very first line item was actually completed. We did that as part of a due diligence effort. One of the major concerns that I had, we went around where they kept their spare parts, if you will, to understand the type of materials that they were using. And were those materials compliant to the requirements of Part 192?
So Mr. Merkel, just so we're all on the same page, you're looking at line 22, which is called the service line. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm looking at line 5 on Excel spreadsheet, line 5.
Great, thank you.
And so what we did, again, I went to where their spare parts were kept, their pipe yard and whatnot. And, all the evidence suggested that they were using materials that were appropriate by code.
Mr. Merkel, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We have a larger version of NWE 6 if the commissioners would like that. Do you have one for Mr. Brown too, please? Apologies for that interruption, Mr. Merkel, if you want to.
No problem. So as you look at this spreadsheet, keep your eye on row E, keep your eye on row G. Row E represents the action, if you will. And column G represents the purpose for the item. So essentially what we did, if again, going back to the gathering system, the systems that go north to the river were explained to me are 3-inch gathering lines. The system between Winifred and Christina was a 4-inch pipeline, and between Christina and Lewistown was a 6-inch pipeline. There's also 2 gatherings going both east and west out of Christina. Those were 3-inch lines. Our purpose here was to go to each one of those line segments and actually expose it in a couple of spots. validate that the print line on the pipe showed and proved that it met the requirements of ASTM D 2513, which are appropriate materials by DOT. We just did that in a couple of spots on each line segment. That's what that line item represents. The next line item is, although we have paper maps like what you show there, we really don't have GPS data in order to pull that into our systems. And understanding exactly where the pipelines are, where the customers are, where the various components are, those are things that we would do.
Mr.
But-
Merkel, can I just stop you there really quick? The map that is NWE4, was that a map that we received from Sleepy Hollow or found in any of their paperwork in the office?
It was not a map that we received. We took the information of maps that were in the office and we created that, but without GPS precision. And we did that actually to be able to provide a map to the one call locate center, and then in turn, when people call in for a locate, or they're near proximity of this asset, then we receive a call to go out and locate it. So that's what we generated to use to make sure that one call locating system was able to do their job. The next item is line 7. That's the annual locating, the 811. The average locates per year, and there's a cost associated with that as well. The next item is leak survey. The one thing that, again, we validated some materials, but until we've done a full leak survey on the whole system, I wouldn't be real comfortable with that system to understand that it's not posing a threat or a risk to the public. Once it's conducted once, I think that's part of the prudency. Given the history of this system, it should be conducted once, and it should be done as soon as possible. And then part of DOT requirements, there's some business district requirements that would probably fall into play with Winifred that would require you to leak survey in Winifred annually. And then the rest of the system, the requirement is by DOT is every 5 years. We have an arrangement and understanding with the Public Service Commission that we do it every 4 years. That has allowed us to align both leak survey and above ground steel for external corrosion. So we do it every 4 years on the rest of our system. That's what we would intend to do there.
So, Mr. Merkel, once, assuming Sleepy Hollow, the commission approves that all the conditions are met and the Sleepy Hollow assets are folded into the Northwestern system, you would do a leak test up front to make sure that sound the system, but then it would be included in the Northwestern rotation thereafter.
It would be. The next item just calls out the MAOP, and our initial observation was that the system was, the regulator was set feeding the system at 52 pounds. That's probably something we would have a discussion with the PSC staff to agree that would be then the MAOP of the system, unless we go through the approved process to increase that system. I certainly wouldn't see a need for that in the immediate future. The next item is markings. That's part of the. And, you know, I will give Sleepy Hollow credit where credit's due. And it's probably because the lack of GPS information. But they have pipeline markers everywhere. And that is a good thing from a public standpoint. Now, what I haven't validated is, are those markers exactly where the pipeline actually exists? That's also a concern. The next item I'm on spreadsheet line 12, abandoned lines, establish where the distribution line should end. And I've already covered that. That's where those X's are. Let's remove the part of the system that's not serving any customers and just remove that risk.
Can you just briefly describe what will you do at those X's? How do you separate out the part that Northwestern is not acquiring?
Yeah, because we're not acquiring them, we'll still take the care for whoever may end up owning them. I don't know what they'll do with them, but what we'll do is we'll create a gap between where one pipeline starts and the other one ends, and we will cap both ends.
And is that industry practice?
It would be. The next one is what we call a first cut reg station. There's at least by our estimate, there's 33 first cut regulators. Now, what a first cut regulator is if I can draw your attention to 5A. Page 3. So any place they were on the 200-pound system, and again, by their design, it was between Christine and Lewistown. Wherever we were, the pipeline was going by a farmhouse or some structure that was intended to be served. They would tap off of what was intended to be a 200-pound system. And then they would put in what you see on page 3, which is a first cut regulator. But what it would do is it would reduce, or it was intended to reduce the pressure from 200 to 100 pounds. And then you go to the house, and then at the house, therefore you were serving at, it could be as high as 100 pounds, could be last 60 pounds. Then at the house, you would reduce it to quarter pounder pressure, 7 inches of water column. Excuse me, 11 inches of water column. So that's the first cut regulators. And again, they're a steel, they're islanded steel. They're not necessary because we won't serve at 200 pounds. The MEOP is 50 pounds. If you just remove this, you connect the inlet piping to the outlet piping, you pipe straight through, and you run line pressure to the house, and then you cut pressure at the house or at the customer appropriate to whatever their appliance needs are.
Mr. Merkel, are these required to be inspected under DOT regulations because they're islanded steel, or are they a little different?
No, they would be. They would have an additional inspection requirement that, again, it's not necessary. The way these are actually operating right now, the regulator is just cranked down so they operate wide open. So 50 pounds that we're serving just passes right through the regulator. And so again, it's just another spot for threaded fittings, for things that'll leak, for just problems on the system.
And how many of those are on the system?
Well, we believe around 30, well, it says 33 in the document, I'll estimate, 35. We think we found all of these, but one of the problems that we have is the only thing for certainty that we've found are those services with meters. There's another line item that's coming up called inactive risers. And because I think because of the unreliability of the system and whatnot, they ran, Sleepy Hollow ran services to a number of buildings out there that they don't have a meter on them. And we would classify that as an inactive riser. That's again, just another risk or a threat to the public to have that out there and not have it served. Without a meter, they don't get viewed probably the way they should from an operating standpoint. And one thing that we will do is we'll be going to all of the structures. Fortunately, there's not a lot of those, a lot of miles, but not a lot of structures that maybe serve to gas to assure that we don't have a riser that's inactive. Now, what we will do before we simply remove those is we will reach out to all those customers. We will give them the opportunity to be served by those. And if they decide they don't want to be served by those, then we will remove the facility and remove the risk that public risk that would pose.
So Mr. Merkel, NWE 5, the PowerPoint with pictures, page 8, I think has a picture of one of those abandoned or inactive risers. Can you confirm that?
Yep, thank you. It does. If you go to page go to page 8. This is actually one by my recollection is in Hilger. And I believe that this once served the Hilger fire department. And by this, you can see there was a recent scar. You could tell that it was recently converted to propane. So I'm assuming this, but I would assume that just because of the reliability concerns and those type of problems, they just elected to go to a more reliable service. But that would be an example of an abandoned riser.
Does Northwestern
Or an inactive riser, sorry.
Does Northwestern have abandoned or inactive risers elsewhere in its system? Is it common to have abandoned risers all over the place?
No, it's not common. We work hard to remove those. I mean, sometimes they take time because, customers intend to use them, but they never quite get to using them. So it takes a little time to work through that. So they will be out there. But they're not abundant on our system, no. I would also point out, since we're in 5, if you go back one page and you look at 7, that's also within this standard. That is a regulating station. It also has an odorant pot. And we found 5 of these stations. They're actually covered by a building. But again, they're islanded steel. They're not necessary on this system. There you can see the regulators and the relief valves that are part of this. And what they were intended to do was to cut the pressure from 200 pounds to something less, but this would deliver to multiple homes. Like, in fact, this picture of this one, by my recollection, is actually in Hilger. So all of the the few 25-ish homes or so that are in Hilger would all be served off of this apparatus.
And can you remind the commission why Northwestern does not need these odorizing pods in the system?
Because we provide odorized gas on our transmission system. And our requirement on the distribution system is just to validate that the odor is present. So we would, and you could even do that today, the way this is being served. You could go to the extremities of this system and take an odorometer and assure that the odorant is proper to be able to sense and smell gas with the average nose, with whatever that is. So.
Okay, let's go back to NWE 6. And I think you were going to talk about blow off stacks in line 15.
Thank you. The other thing that is typical of a gathering system, you don't see this much with a distribution or even a transmission system. Transmission systems will have, on occasion, you'll have block valves so that if you have a problem on a line segment, you can address it. But on this particular one, there's or this particular system, and I'm talking between Winifred and Lewistown, there are just numerous valves, block valves. And at each block valve, there is a blow-off valve on either side of the block valve. Now, many of these valves are also positioned in the swales of the topography. And the reason why you would do that on a gathering system is you would expect that the liquids are going to form in those swales. So if you have, in operating a pipeline, a wet pipeline, if you start to see pressure differentials that you wouldn't expect, then you probably have blockage within your pipeline. So what these valves allow you to do is to open it up, use gas pressure, and you can remove the liquids that may be formed in those swales. So again, it's a gathering line function. It has no need in a distribution or transmission line. We wouldn't remove the block valve. The valves themselves are all plastic. The problem is that the risers are steel. So again, you have potentially islanded steel and steel that could corrode. So we would try to remove the steel. They also, there's so many of them too, that they're also an appurtenance that sit in farmers' fields and those type of things. And they can be struck, hit, knocked over and create a blown gas situation.
And I apologize, Mr. Merkel. I think I actually gave you the wrong line number. I think regulator station was probably the next one.
Actually, I covered it.
Okay.
That was the item that I discussed that was in Hilger.
Okay.
On page 7 on exhibit 5, the picture on the right. Then the next one just talks about this is an ongoing thing that you would have to do, and I already discussed this too. That's to validate quarterly that the gas serving these customers is appropriately odorized. The next several items are actually all those compressor stations that we talked about. And they just serve no purpose in the distribution system. And they pose nothing but liability. They should be removed and piped through. Moving into the service lines, there's line 23 is just calls out the need to perform periodic leak survey. and also record the location of services. Line 25 is the inactive services that I talked about. And we believe there's around 25 of these. But I'll be the first to admit, we have not went to all potential structures to see if there's actually more of these. An activity we would have to do. The next several items are just annual inspections, things that you do for DOT. The other thing that we haven't done a lot of that I'd be interested in understanding is the installation of EFVs, which are excess flow valves. Purpose of these on a gas system is if a service line is hit, there's a mechanism that triggers, and if there's too much flow, it actually stops all flow. So it's a public safety component. In the time frame that this was built, these should have been installed. We would want to validate that they were. The next item is meters. And this item's already been done we actually had to go find the meters in order to read the meters, and it did take us a couple of times to get that done. The next item labeled as Itron meters. If we don't change out the meters, we would have to continually manually read the meters. Very inefficient, and we could easily pay back this number to replace the meters to a meter that we could at least read the meters through AMR, where we could just simply drive by the region and pick up all the reads versus going to every meter and read them manually like we've been doing for the last couple of months. But there is a charge for meter reading. The charge that's in here is assuming that we've changed out the meters to an AMR. We do have meter proving requirements. That's a statistical requirement, and that includes that charge. So many of the items that I just talked about are more of a year-over-year ongoing maintenance requirement. There's a few items listed on here for what we would need. One thing that we don't believe we need is the main building that Sleepy Hollow operated out of.
Is that building commonly known as the shop?
It is commonly known as the shop. We don't believe we need that facility to operate the system. The Winifred compressor building, however, a small building that's located adjacent to the shop. It has a compressor, a very small compressor in it right now. What we would do is remove that compressor. We would fence around that building, and that would give us enough of a yard to house materials that may be needed to respond to the system. And also have enough of the building to house whatever equipment that needs to be inside could be kept inside. So we certainly would scale down tremendously. Our personnel operating the system would still reside in our shop and district office in Lewistown, but we can respond out of that. That would just give us a place for materials and potentially to house equipment.
Jason, just for the record, a picture of that compressor hut is on page 11, I believe, of Exhibit 5, if you want to confirm that.
It is, all five of the, or excuse me, all four of the pictures on page 11 of exhibit 5 are of that facility. The equipment that you see in those pictures, 3 pictures to the right, would just be removed.
Is there anything else on exhibit NWE 6 that you want to highlight for the commissioners?
Nothing.
Can you please turn to NWE 8 and 8A and just briefly identify what those are? Chair, Mr. Chair, I probably have another half hour or so with Mr. Merkel.
We will now take a break. The time is 10:56. 10 minutes, good enough for everyone? Okay. For the record, the time is 10:56 and we'll resume the hearing at 10 after 11. Now we're off the record. We are now back on the record. The time is 11:15 and we will resume the hearing.
Is it back to me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead and continue with your questions.
Excellent, thank
or,
you.
Examination.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Merkel, I think we were looking at exhibit NWE 8. If you could just tell the commission what those are and how they relate to the spreadsheet we just went through.
Yeah, these support the numbers that are contained within the spreadsheet. I would start with the second part of this. 8A, if you will. 8A is the estimate to GPS and precisely locate the facilities that Northwestern Energy would have interest to retain. The first one labeled NWE 8, then once it's located, this represents the costs through a contractor that we regularly use within Montana to perform leak survey services. And they provided us these estimates of what it would take to leak survey the initial leak survey for the Sleepy Hollow assets that Northwestern Energy would have interest in retaining.
Mr. Merkel, when will Northwestern be able to move forward with this work? And I'm sorry, let me clarify, the work that is identified generally in NWE 6, the bigger spreadsheet.
Ideally, we would, there are certain items that are probably a higher priority, just to assure that the assets are not a problem, not an issue, leak survey being one of them, determining the precise location, that would be something else. Some of those activities, I believe we could actually schedule and coordinate as soon as this fall, depending on the timeline of these proceedings. Or certainly we would be, some of the items would fall into next year. We do need some time to create a plan and assure that we've found, for example, all the inactive risers, and that in itself would take a little time to work through because it's customer dependent on a decision on whether they would want to reconnect, those type of items. Much of it, to answer your question, long-winded, but much of it we could begin this fall. The bulk of it would probably fall into construction season next year.
Mr. Merkel, are you representing to the commission that the costs in NWE 6 are the exact costs that Northwestern will incur if it acquires the assets?
No, I'm not representing that they're the exact costs. Those numbers were developed based on our experiences doing this same type of work throughout our service territory. Average costs for various activities. I would say though that they're accurate, likely not precise, but the potential change to those are if we get into doing the work and we find things that we didn't anticipate. And I don't know how you put a number for on the unanticipated, but I'm just concerned enough with the history of the companies that were involved that there could be some unanticipated.
Can you describe for the commission just briefly how you reached these numbers?
Largely what we did is we went through the 192 requirements and we we started with a list of everything that we're required to do to operate a natural gas distribution system. And we went from there. And we put those into two categories. One is a category that's just going to be the cost, and you're going to have to do it at some period. And then we just develop the period based off of, develop the cost based off of average costs elsewhere, known costs. I would say those costs are very accurate. As far as the other items we looked at, we did try to understand, okay, there's a requirement here. Can we do something else so that there's not an annual requirement or a period requirement that would, over time, that if you just dealt with the asset to remove that cost, it would be better for all ratepayers associated with the system. So many of the things like we talked about, removing all the islanded steel, that's an example of something you would do. Yes, it's an upfront cost, but you'll realize savings in the things that you don't have to do in the form of inspections on ongoing maintenance on the system and inspection.
So I note on exhibit NWE6, the spreadsheet, on columns, it looks like K, L, M, and N, you have identified the annual cost and then broken those down as divided by Sleepy Hollow and or Northwestern's larger natural gas customer base. Can you talk a little bit about your process there?
Yeah, there's certain items that were, a one-time cost. Actually, those are in column I. At the very end of this, excuse me, if you look at column I and J, let me start there. I and J, I is the item and what it would cost to complete that item. J would be the cost of that item divided by the number of Sleepy Hollow customers, to give you a cost per customer per item. And then there's also some totals at the very end of I and J. If you look at the total cost, at least what we've estimated with what we're aware is out there. And again, we didn't add any contingencies for the unanticipated. But with what we know is there, that number is $467,169. The cost per Sleepy Hollow customer to do all that work would be roughly $3,200 per customer. The same is true if you look at this spreadsheet and you look at we also did the same thing with annual costs. And the annual costs are in K and in L. And those would be things that we would just have to do periodically, things like leak survey and read meters. And it's another one we would have here. Zone valve inspection would be another annual cost that you're gonna see. Again, divide that by the Sleepy Hollow customers, and you'll see the cost of that in column L. The total annual cost per Sleepy Hollow customer just to operate the system, we're estimating right at about $100 per customer.
Mr. Merkel, is Northwestern asking the commission to decide today how to break up costs to customers?
We're not, but we needed to show, or at least it was important to show, that the Sleepy Hollow customers, the number of customers that are on that, even with some level of growth years into the future, there's no way that this system could ever be viable, profitable on its own. There's just no way it could occur. And the only way it, in my opinion, that it could occur is if the NWE total customers help subsidize the takeover of that system. And those numbers are reflected in column M and N. The overall cost to NWE customers, and I believe what we used here was residential customers versus total customers. At residential customer, the initial cost of doing all that initial work, the one-time work, would be a cost to all customers at roughly $2.60. And then the increased amount to all NWE customers to take over the system would be roughly 9 cents per customer.
Mr. Merkel, would you expect these issues of what are the actual costs and the cost allocations to be taken up in a future rate case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if that's the biggest concern that I have, is that we go forward with the idea that, great deal at a buck. It's not necessarily a great deal at a buck. And I think the decision is going to come down to is the best interest, public interest of those 100 and some employees or customers that have been served. And if the decision is that NWE should serve those, and of anybody I can think of in the state, we're certainly the most reputable, and have the professionalism and the ability to serve these customers safely and reliably.
Switching gears just a little bit, did Northwestern perform an environmental site assessment?
Our environmental group did. In fact, I accompanied the inspector, Beth Steinmetz, and she did an assessment of all of the assets that we would intend to keep or to be part of this purchase agreement. Nothing beyond that.
And just for the record, Ms. Steinmetz's environmental site assessment is exhibit NWE 9. Mr. Merkel, are you aware of any substantive issues that were identified by Ms. Steinmetz in her report?
No, I am not. I would just add to that to say, I've been around production fields and gas fields that have been producing for years, and normally there would be quite a concern because of oil spills, stains, those type of problems. I guess the fortunate side is the gas wells never produced anything, so there's not a lot of residual of those type of problems evident.
Are there any due diligence issues related to operations of the Sleepy Hollow system we haven't discussed?
Well, yeah, there could be. That's my worry. Again, it's 80 miles of facility that's buried, and we've looked at everything we could look at above ground, and everything above ground, for the most part, I will say, as far as the services that are at the house, I'm pleased with the construction practices that are at the house. Everything else that's above ground, I want to get rid of. And I've looked at the below ground stuff in about 8 locations. So not sure how to answer that.
Let me rephrase. Is there anything related to due diligence that you want to bring to the commission's attention that I haven't asked you about?
Not anything specific that I can think of, no.
So let's switch gears. This is my last substantive section and it shouldn't take very long. Let's talk about the natural gas sales from Northwestern to Sleepy Hollow. Does Northwestern sell natural gas on a wholesale basis to Sleepy Hollow today?
And not to be smart, but we've been giving gas to Sleepy Hollow. I don't know that there's been a sale of much. But yes, we've provided gas to Sleepy Hollow customers.
Fair enough. Could you please look at Exhibit NWE 10, which for the record is also part of the documents provided through discovery to the Montana Consumer Council?
I have it before me, yes.
Okay. Let's also, so I'm sorry, can you identify what this is for the record?
This would be the amount that we have. This would be the billing statement for Sleepy Hollow.
So this was the statement provided in discovery. There have been 2 months outside of the discovery request. If you could turn to NWE 20, 21 and just identify what those are.
They would be the invoice or bill that we provided Sleepy Hollow for the month of June and July.
You could please turn your attention to NWE 1. Amount due, can you just read into the record what Sleepy Hollow?
Total amount due is $84,350.11.
Could you next turn to NWE 11? Identify that for the record.
That's a disconnect notice to Sleepy Hollow.
And to the best of your knowledge, has Northwestern served this disconnect notice on Sleepy Hollow?
We have not.
If Northwestern does not receive authority to acquire the assets, will we serve the disconnect notice?
We will.
Final question. Mr. Merkel, do you believe that it's in the public interest for Northwestern to acquire the assets of Sleepy Hollow?
I believe that if the commission believes that these customers should be served, that absolutely Northwestern Energy is the company that should serve these customers. I would hope that the commission would understand that this is more than a dollar purchase, and there are costs that will be borne by the company in order to take these assets, and that we would get fair treatment for these assets. But certainly Northwestern Energy is the one in the state that could serve these customers, meet the federal guidelines for delivering gas safely to these 140 some customers, 150 some meters. You do the best job by far.
Thank you, Mr. Merkel. Northwestern tenders this witness for cross-examination.
Does MCC wish to recross this witness?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few clarifying questions. I'll try to be brief. Mr. Merkel, I just wanted to ask about the the number of customers, because you mentioned just now how there's maybe around 140 customers and 150 meters. Can you explain the difference there?
Yeah, some customers have more than 1 meter. They might have one on their shop, one on their house. So as that customer, they have more meters.
And is it a mix of residential and small commercial customers?
Yeah, we mentioned a few commercial, there are very few commercial, they're in Winifred, that'd be the school. The restaurant there, grocery store. Couple of pubs across the street. So small commercial district, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's far less than 10, I would guess.
And is everyone who's taking gas off the system metered?
To my knowledge.
So, were there any contracts negotiated with landowners, to your knowledge, that gave some sort of right to free gas in exchange for the easement for the pipeline?
None that I'm aware of.
And so, the 154, can you just kind of explain what that represents then? Is that meters or is that the
The
number?
154 would be meters.
Okay,
The accounts or the customers is less than that. 100 and I don't have the exact number on that. 142, I believe.
okay.
It's in the spreadsheet. I didn't take time to count them up, but it's in one of these earliest exhibits.
Okay.
7, NWE 7.
And then I don't think Ms. Heim had asked you about taxes, but there were some exhibits related to taxes that are owed by Sleepy Hollow or perhaps Ozair to the Department of Revenue. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Do you know whether any of the other witnesses today would be familiar with that?
For the record, Ms. Perry will talk about the tax liens.
Thank you. And then just maybe one other kind of area I want to ask about is in NWE 6 regarding the cost per customer. And I think you'd mentioned that the total estimated initial cost per Sleepy Hollow customer shows that this system isn't viable. Do you remember that?
I do.
I guess I was wondering with that initial cost, is that shown per customer over 1 year? And I'm looking at column J.
No, not 1 year. That if
Okay.
we complete this, the work that's necessary to operate this system, that will be a one-time cost. And then for each year thereafter, if you looked at column L,
Okay,
that would be the cost for each year thereafter.
okay,
So in year 1, it would be the 3,200 plus L.
and do you know whether when a utility incurs a bunch of upfront costs to get service established, are those costs usually recovered all at once, or are they recovered from customers over some longer period of time?
Well, now you're getting into the discussion of capital and expense. And it's a good question because there are certain items on here that, depending on the rate treatment, that could be capitalized. So then over an asset life, right? And it wouldn't represent that to the customers. This is assuming that it would be all upfront. There are some of these items, some are expense. Some are typically the annual items are an expense. The one time, many of the items, removal of those assets, removal of various, the compressor stations, for example, that could be treated with a capital type approach and then be allocated over the life of that asset.
And have you provided any analysis
No,
of that?
none.
Okay.
No, I'm an operating guy, sorry.
Do you know if Northwestern's done any analysis of those costs that might be more appropriately spread out over time?
Not yet, because I understood that, at least for this proceeding, that we knew that we would have to discuss at some point the cost allocation and the mechanism for that.
Okay. I know I said one final area. I have one final area, I believe. I wanted to go back to the maximum allowable operating pressure. It sounded like coming off your transmission pipe, it's going to be at 400 pounds. And that for this system, once it gets into this system, that it's going to drop down to about 52 pounds or 50 pounds. Did I hear that roughly correct?
Yeah, 52 or less
52.
for the time being.
Okay. And I heard that you're removing equipment and there'll be some costs to remove equipment. My question is there any new equipment that needs to be added to, for example, change the pressure down at the point of, you called it a point of purchase, but it's always been a point of sale.
Yeah, and I actually missed that item in here. It's so that right now that point is a purchase station and it's set up to receive. And we would want to put in the proper regulation to deliver. And that item is actually in here. I likely missed it. It's if you go to spreadsheet item 20 on NWE exhibit 6.
So does that show that you would need to install a new regulating station?
That's correct.
And the purpose of that would be to step the pressure down?
They're doing it now. Yeah, it's what I would say equipment that's not appropriate. Certainly not reliable for those customers.
Right, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn over questions to some fellow commissioners, I'd like to ask a couple myself, and then I'm going to give an opportunity to each commissioner to ask some questions. Seeing here is a situation that may have not happened in the United States like it's happened here. I cannot believe the press hasn't covered this story yet. What in essence has happened is a power company left the power on and walked off the job. That's absolutely stunning. And I'm looking for an answer, and maybe you can answer this and maybe not. And I'm glad a senator is here and a representative from the area, because I think legislation may have to be introduced to protect us from this sort of situation in the future. In the event a power company walks off the job, leaves the power on, and there's no one there, was there any protocol to follow to take over, to help out or assist that you know of, that you guys can come in and save us? Or did we have to make up a protocol? What are your thoughts there?
In my experience, Commissioner, yeah, this is very unique, absolutely unique. And Northwestern Energy certainly had to work with the receivers, the communities to assist in this situation. So no, there's no on the manual, when brand X picks up and leaves the job for us to go in and resume their responsibility.
With that answer, I would like to see, or at least it's worth asking, could Northwestern, the Public Service Commission, and then even the MCC work with legislators to put something in place and set an example for the rest of the country to have a protocol set in place? Perhaps the legislature does that. So we have a place to start if this ever happens again. What are your thoughts to that? And would you like to be involved with that?
If I could assist, I'd be happy to assist. I'm just not sure how I could assist with all of that. But if my expertise and what, my testimony, you believe I could assist, I would certainly be willing to help.
All right, so I absolutely agree with MCC. We have to be careful here, ask every question, because we are dealing with something that may not have been dealt with in the history of Montana or maybe even the United States. So and I can't believe the press hasn't covered this story yet. So I'm trying to look out for the ratepayer. And it's also my duty to make sure I look out for the power company. And I cannot thank Northwestern enough to come in and deal with this situation where at any moment a gas leak could have happened, the school could have blew up, and people would have said, how in the heck did this happen when there was no one there at the job? I'm telling you, it was a miracle. But we couldn't really turn the power off at the moment because it was in the middle of winter, right? So some of the things I'm listening to is there's going to be some cost. I heard you say $3,200 per customer. And I'm thinking I'd like Northwestern to take the shop, if they can get all this for $1, and then we sell it at auction, and maybe we can sell this huge building for $500,000, and that would pay the $84,000 and pay a lot of these costs. Here I'm protecting the ratepayer from getting slapped with that bill, and I'm kind of protecting Northwest Energy getting zapped with a lien. Wasn't it discussed to take the building for $1, sell it at auction, and use some of the money to pay those bills?
No, that wasn't. I mean, was it discussed if we should keep or have the building part of that? And certainly was in the discussion of the committee and the group that we worked with. From an operating standpoint, that building's not needed for Northwestern Energy. So our focus on keeping the assets that we needed to serve those customers.
Well, keeping the assets to be able to sell them off to get some bills paid certainly protects Northwest Energy and the ratepayer. Was that idea discussed?
Chairman Panochi, I would just note that the receiver, Mr. Silver, will be up later, and he might be a more appropriate party to ask these questions to.
Thank you. That will try to remind me of that in case I forget. I'm trying to set the tone for other commissioners, a baseline for them to to say, hey, what situation are we dealing with here? There's no protocol, no experience. This hasn't happened before. And I certainly expect a lot of questions to be asked, and I no way want anyone to feel like we don't trust anyone. We don't trust Northwestern. We're trying to be thorough, trying to represent the ratepayer, and I'm trying to protect the power company. So the bad actors here are some knuckleheads from out of state who ran everything into the ground. And I would like them to pay as much of these bills to protect my ratepayer and the power company who I'm asking to take all this over. Was there discussion on that you might have been involved with on how do we accomplish that to the out-of-staters that made these mistakes to pay these bills? Was that discussed?
What was discussed, my involvement was 150 some meters and 140 some customers that need to be served safely. That was the majority of my involvement with this. The mechanics of how to obtain these assets in the Northwestern, I haven't been involved with.
That may be a question for someone else. I wanted to set off some questions like that. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to other commissioners, and then I'll follow up with questions that I think should be asked that they may not have asked. But I think that was a good place to start. So which commissioner would like to go first? Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Merkel, I appreciate you being here with us. I've got more questions here than I would dare ask in this setting right now, but I do have a few. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear. In round numbers, at least, we're talking about upfront costs over and above the cost of gas for a year to a customer of $3,200, a one-time cost. Am I correct in my understanding that that is in all likelihood best case scenario, and that you all Northwestern will not know what other undiscovered or hidden additional costs might be there until you take ownership and can have a more in-depth analysis of the system? Is that an accurate understanding that that 3,200 could in fact be more than that when all was said and done?
Mr. Vice President, that's an accurate assessment that the costs we're given, we know those costs will be within that ballpark. There may be items that we're unaware of that would drive those costs up. I don't see those costs going down.
But
From what they're
and
representing.
I realize, what we do, we're all the time here at this commission, crystal ball gazing. So I'm going to ask you to do a little of that as well. But conceivably, there could be some significant additional costs yet to be discovered, and they wouldn't be discovered until Northwestern acquires the assets, which then justifies the additional expenditure of time and manpower to do a more in-depth evaluation of the system.
It's possible. Everything you described is possible. I will caveat that to say though that this is a unique situation, but these assets to us are not unique. So we had a pretty good idea what we should go look for, and we looked. And if there was a concern, some way, somehow, my team and I would have probably represented some sort of a ballpark. I feel pretty good about what I've seen with the assets. The connections that were made, how the connections were made, the fusions, those type of things. If you remove all this other stuff, you're left with pipe and fused ends. Other than what you can see above ground. So there's not a lot of glaring risk out there. Unless we find out that of the 80 miles, 20 of it was put in with pipe that didn't meet DOT standards.
I would guess stranger things have happened over time, but at any rate, that's helpful there. Ms. Hyman, her opening remarks indicated that there was not an anticipation that revenues from the 140 customers would be adequate to operate the system. Is that your understanding? My understanding that?
Yeah, given the annual costs and even without the deferred costs, depreciation, asset depreciation, it's not a viable model.
And the number may, excuse me, be here on the spreadsheet and I've missed it, so help me with that. But what is, the shortfall between revenues an O and M requirement in a year of operating the system?
I didn't get into the analysis with revenues. I was asked to evaluate the assets and develop the cost aspect of that. So I can't answer those questions, only because I didn't do the evaluation.
Is it accurate to assume, though, that whatever that shortfall is between revenue and O and M, that's the amount that Northwestern would anticipate sharing with the rest of the customer base of Northwestern?
That's what I would assume, yes.
But we don't know what that number might be.
I don't have that number, Mr. Vice President. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to take any more time here. Those are the only questions I've got for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Johnson. If you think of other questions, I certainly will allow you to ask them. President Jim Brown, would you like to ask some questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman will allow me some leeway here. Questions for council first.
I will.
This time, do you expect to have a witness that will talk about the asset purchase agreement in terms of that?
I have Mr. Aaron Fox on standby if you have specific questions about the asset purchase agreement, because of course I could speak to it, but I can't be both the lawyer and the witness. So I will have a witness that will be available if you would like to ask those questions.
And
I'm happy to field them also, knowing that they would not be considered evidence.
right, I understand that, and colloquy with Mr. Green about a year ago about this very thing. I would suggest perhaps you have your witness on standby. I'm just going to make them. Mr. Brown, do you intend to call any witnesses?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, no.
All right. I must confess, and this is, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me some leeway here. It's more of a
Absolutely.
more of a statement than a question period. I'm a little confused where we're at in terms of this hearing at present, and I apologize if I'm the only one. There were 4 issues that essentially were presented to the commission today. And those being whether Northwestern's acquisition of the Sleepy Hollow assets is in the public interest, whether Sleepy Hollow customers will become Northwestern customers on a date certain, whether Northwestern's incurred costs and future costs should be borne equally by all Northwestern's natural gas customers, and then whether the commission should agree not to take enforcement action against Northwestern for matters related to events that happened before possible acquisition. Now, do I understand correctly that at least one of these issues has been taken off the table today?
So
That would be the customers based on a future compliance filing?
So it is our intention to treat Sleepy Hollow customers as Northwestern customers, bill them pursuant to our tariff for rate and terms of service. It came up late that there was some dispute, and that's on me, that I assumed that it made the most sense to spread costs amongst all of the natural gas customers. But that issue is in fact for the rate case, not for today. And so the bigger issue of public service or public interest is, does it make sense for some customer class, whether it be the Sleepy Hollow customers or the natural gas customers of Northwestern as a whole, to bear the costs that we have generally identified, but will be later proven out and go through a prudency review in a rate case?
So, but as I understood from Mr. Brown's opening, there's some concern from the MCC that getting into this type of issue may create due process concern, Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I think with what Ms. Heim just represented to you all, if to me, it's the third issue that was mentioned, whether costs associated with the acquisition of Sleepy Hollow assets should be borne equally. I would emphasize equally by all Northwestern customers is an issue for the rate case. It's a rate making issue that I'm urging you to defer. And I would share, I guess, I was confused about whether that was something that would be at issue today or in the future rate case. But if we all agree that's a rate case issue, I don't think there's any dispute about that.
All right, I appreciate that clarification. I think it's helpful. So is it fair to say that what we're truly discussing today is the authority to acquire the assets?
I believe that's true, but I think that that requires a public interest determination because we have identified substantial cost and we will continue to pull that out through additional evidence. And so there is an understanding on Northwestern's part that those costs, when proven out, the actual costs are proven out in a rate case, that they are recoverable. Because otherwise, we can't really go forward.
I think you just drove at the point that I'm bandying about in my mind at this point.
Well,
I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Heim. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I just would point out too that this docket is incredibly unique. We are not plowing new ground. We are not looking to do something that would necessarily set a precedent for future commission action. This is, as Chairman Pinochi noted, incredibly unique, not just the way we're holding this hearing, during live direct testimony, but the asks of the commission they are certainly within your purview, but it is not Northwestern's view that this is something that will be in front of you in this manner again.
I appreciate the comment, Ms. Heim. I agree with your statement and that of Chairman Pinochi. I mean, this is truly a unique situation. And so with that in mind, I'm just trying to basically put the pieces of the puzzle together in my own mind. I think, Simon, I would ask you to have Mr. Aaron Fox available at some point, because I do have some questions about the asset purchase agreement in this manner. At this point in time, Mr. Chairman, no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner Fielder, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have any questions?
Yes, indeed. I want to thank you for all of the incredibly detailed analysis of what's there and what's likely to be needed on that thing. There was one of your answers that concerned me. It seemed to be a little contradictory. You indicated to me that it would be a gas transmission system instead of a collection system, and that you would not need the wells, so you wouldn't take them. And I'm concerned about the safety issue. Certainly, the Sleepy Hollow, the incumbent owner, maybe it's just because of the legal frustrations of the bankruptcy system and the death of the previous owner that nobody was around to make any decisions. But the system was left in disrepair, and nobody was watching the store. And as Senator Butcher pointed out, that what happens when things are not maintained. What I'm concerned about is that if the company does not assume ownership of the wells or the collection system, then who is going to make sure that the safety issues are addressed on there. The incumbent doesn't seem to be physically able, corporately able to do that. And with Northwestern saying that they weren't going to do that either, they weren't even going to take ownership of them. Can you help me out with the safety issue of these sources of gas that could pose a serious risk to the community?
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Just to be clear, are we talking about the gas wells themselves, or the collection system that we won't?
Yeah. Thank you for the request for clarification. It seemed to me that you said that you were simply not interested in the wells, you couldn't use them, and that I think it seemed to me you were treating the wells and the collection system equally, and saying that you weren't interested in either one of those, and that you were not contemplating taking ownership of them. So I'm thinking if you don't own them and the incumbent is not exercising any obligations of ownership, then who takes care of it? That's my question.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, and I apologize. I probably confused this in my testimony, but the whole Sleepy Hollow gas system is a collection system. The whole thing, it's all of the pipeline is a collection system, as you've described it. That happens to serve customers. So there's the wells and there's the collection system. We are proposing to take over the vast majority of the collection system and in turn convert it to a distribution system.
Okay.
So hopefully that clarifies the collection system, the pipe facilities. There are I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
There are portions of the collection system that just aren't needed. There's just no customers beyond a certain point. And so in order to, in the interest of reducing future maintenance costs, we would not take over those assets. We wouldn't need them. So we would fall short and use only the collection system needed to convert to a distribution system to serve all customers. As far as the wells, I can't answer the question that you have. Who is going to be responsible for the wells beyond Northwestern Energy? I can't answer the question of that. I don't know.
Well, thank you. I think that's a very key thing on there. And let me confess that in the back of my mind was an incident that happened in Colorado a number of years ago, that there was an abandoned line that apparently nobody knew about, and that gas collected in this line very, very slowly over a significant period of time, and that a large house was built over this, and the house was reduced to splinters because of a resulting explosion, and that some company had apparently a long time ago abandoned that line, but it was still being filled, although very, very gradually, but it posed an incredible risk. And So that's my concern, is that any part of the system would be left without anybody having oversight over it, and that if something negative happened, that people would say, well, it wasn't my responsibility, it was theirs. And the other person saying, well, you knew that we were not an entity that existed anymore, so we couldn't do anything about it. That's my concern. My understanding and my comfort level would be that Northwestern would assume responsibility for the entire project. Being, it seems to be obvious to me that if Northwestern doesn't take it over, ain't nobody going to do it. And that really, really concerns me. And you may not be the person. We're talking about a policy decision, I suppose, and that's out of your realm on that there. But do you share my concern that if any part of the system is left untendered, that it could pose a serious safety problem in the future? I know from your testimony, you fully and completely understand the volatile nature of the commodity you're dealing with. But I'd like your opinion on that.
Chairman Panochi, Commissioner O'Donnell, this is Shannon Heim. If I may briefly, Beth Steinmetz, who is an environmental compliance specialist with the company, will be available this afternoon, and she is prepared to talk about the Montana DEQ process for abandoning wells and handling that type of infrastructure. If you'd like to talk about that, I think she's probably a better witness for you.
That's fine. I would still like the opinion of this witness having to do with the, as I say, the volatile nature and his experience with lines that are not completely have complete oversight and management of them.
Commissioner O'Donnell, the wells, I've been told, I have not confirmed this, but I've been told that they are not connected to the collection system. Most of these wells were drilled and never produced. And in fact, there's one that I can confirm this, west of Christina, that is currently being used as a stock water well. So to give you a flavor of, they're not necessarily producing wells. Now, do they impose a potential environmental hazard? You know, those type of things, most certainly they could. And I don't know the details on this. And I would refer you to Beth Steinmetz, but I do know with my experience in oil and gas industry with wells, there are state programs for wells such as these that don't have an owner. I believe you actually have to put up bond to drill a well, so that if you abandon the well, that the state can come in and appropriately deal with that well. That's part of the permit process with wells. But again, I haven't confirmed that they're connected, but I've been told that they're not connected. Everything you can deal with to prevent the problem that you described about pressuring a system is you simply pipe a vent to it, a vent that can be monitored. You leave it open. You know, then if you can monitor it for gas activity from time to time.
Thank you
for that issue.
No, I appreciate your answer, and it seemed like when you were responding to Ms. Heim's questions, that it seemed to me, without being an engineer, that you pretty well thought of everything on there, and I was quite impressed with that. But let me say that and I'm very impressed with Northwestern's promptness of assuming management of the system to make sure that it for the users were not deprived of this resource, and that immediate safety issues were addressed. I really appreciate the company doing that. However, I would have serious misgivings about any final decision on this if any part of the system that would pose danger would not be effectively addressed competently by the company. I don't want any hanging chads, any loose threads to this whole thing that would cause some concern in the future. So I'm not necessarily asking for a response to that from you, but Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of my questions. Thank you.
Chairman O'Donnell, thank you. I would like to add, because I think it's in the spirit of what you just described, that as you were discussing, and I too am very proud of, that the company stepped up and assisted these customers. And can understand why we would be asked or have interest to do it on an ongoing basis. It's one of those good Samaritan things, though, that it would be incredibly disappointing if we stepped up to assist these customers and then somehow ultimately in the future be harmed by doing just that.
Thank you. Let me respond to that also, is to say that I realize that Northwestern is a company that, as any company, has to be concerned with profitability, and that's very, very important. But I did want to say that I really respect that the company, in addition to having a profit motivation on this, showed great citizenship and concern, and that part of it I'm deeply respectful for, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. I want to remind Commissioner Fielder, if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I'd like to ask Patricia for some help if the hand is raised, because I may not see it on the screen. I'd like to give Vice Chairman Johnson an opportunity to ask another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I friend that always said she had three speeches: the one she wrote, the one she delivered, and the one she wished she delivered. And that's kind of the way I get with my questioning sometimes, Mr. Merkel. So I apologize for coming back for just a very brief second round. We were talking about costs of fixing up the system and getting it back into shape. If we were looking at transition of these natural gas customers to propane, help me understand. I think that's an area where you would have some understanding and expertise, right? And I'm not. If in fact orifices can be swapped out in a gas range or a furnace or a gas water heater, that's a pretty inexpensive, straightforward process, correct?
And for the most part, just labor a few parts, if the appliance will allow it. Otherwise, you have to change out the appliance.
They can do it. So in that case, and we have no way of knowing how many of those 140 folks could be converted that cheaply, but we'd be looking at certainly considerably less than $3,200 to move them to, if they're not replacing a bunch of appliances.
Well, no, because you still have a tank installation and other assets that you have to.
Okay.
And it's probably, in the ballpark. Would be my guess. We've done some of this work. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the average of that work, but we could probably provide that
That would be-
at a later
That
time.
would be interesting to see that number. The other question is, when we talk about ongoing O and M and all of that, is there anything to be achieved in terms of savings with, or would it even be possible to convert the current system to something akin to Townsend Propane, where there's a distribution system from a propane source? Does that accomplish anything, or just add additional costs and not even worth discussing?
I'm thinking you're in the latter. Only because, I mean, we have a good transmission source. You know, for the most part, we're connected to that source, other than the reg station that we discussed, the new component. And I'm thinking with my knowledge of Townsend Propane, we'd be well north
Okay.
to go with those kind of
Kind of
assets.
suspected that, but
Yeah.
thought I asked. And so yes, if y'all could follow up with that average cost of conversion, that would be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice President Johnson. Let's turn now to President Jim Brown.
Well, I will echo the vice president's comments that after thinking about the questioning I asked of legal counsel, which helped clarify for me what kind of evidence we need to elucidate today. I do have some questions for you, Mr. Merkel. So it's clear that one of Northwestern's requests of the commission in this point is to issue some kind of order stating that the commission will not take an enforcement action for any failures perhaps of the previous owner, like an enforcement action to that effect. Is that correct?
Yeah, for example, I can't show you any records of when that was last leak surveyed. We take this over immediately, day one, we would be in a non-compliance mode. Certainly, we would be asking for some realistic time frame in order to achieve compliance.
That's exactly where I was going, Mr. Merkel. So thank you for that answer. So let's follow up on what you just stated there. So you're aware, of course, that this commission issued an order to show cause to Sleepy Hollow earlier this year, correct?
I'm sorry.
You are aware that the PSC issued an order to show cause to Sleepy Hollow this year?
I'm vaguely familiar with that.
Okay. So maybe this is, well, I'll ask you the question anyway. So obviously, if you purchase the assets of Sleepy Hollow, and Sleepy Hollow no longer has, well, under what, let me rephrase this question, maybe it could be to a different witness, but do you have any concerns that, what concerns do you have that the commission would try to enforce a show cause order against a different party, against Northwestern Energy, if any?
You know, in this unique situation, I think the understanding of your staff of what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know that I would have a concern that would occur. You know, people change, commissions change, and I think what we're looking for is, given those changes, for those that aren't maybe familiar with the uniqueness of the situation, that might be part of the staff or the commission in a future date, that we would receive fair treatment given the uniqueness of this situation.
Appreciate that answer. So follow up, Mr. Chair.
Follow up.
So I'll just ask you more directly just to build the record in this matter. If Northwestern acquires the assets of Sleepy Hollow, does Northwestern intend to do what it can to produce the maintenance records and that sort of thing that the commission had previously requested of Sleepy Hollow?
I I can say I've given up trying to find them. So I think we're gonna spend our effort in achieving known compliance through action.
So as I understand your follow-up, Mr. Chair. Follow-up. As I understand, it's your testimony today that Northwestern Energy has already engaged in due diligence in trying to find the records of Sleepy Hollow, correct?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'll paint a picture for you. It's one office with a box full of papers, and I believe I've looked at every paper. That's about what we got.
Then it goes without saying, of course, that if you assume operation and ownership of the system, that Northwest Energy does intend to comply with the record keeping requirements as demanded, if you will, or required.
As we do on all of our system by and required by CFR 49 Part 192. Absolutely.
All right.
We just need time to get the system to that state.
All right. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Merkel, to your knowledge, I've had a ratepayer tell me that they felt that the gas wells still produce an amount of gas that is used. To your knowledge, are all gas wells non-producing wells at this time?
I haven't confirmed much about the wells because, again, we don't have interest in those wells. And what I've been told, secondhand from those that have worked with my staff that were formerly associated with Sleepy Hollow, is that there are very few wells that produce anything at all. The one or two that produced some in the beginning, I've been told, didn't produce enough gas to even operate the compressor fuel. The compressor engines that should have drawn on the well in order to provide gas to others on the system. That's my knowledge of the wells. Very limited, secondhand, haven't confirmed much. Again, knowing that they are very poor producers, if they produce anything at all. Again, one, west of Christina, that I have confirmed, a local rancher farmer is using it for a water well to serve his stock. So he dropped a water pump in it.
Thank you. So let's talk about a wet dry system. I understand the system's wet. If we get rid of the compressors where X marks the spot and we cap off some of these lines coming from the wells, over time, could we transform the system into a dry system? And is that your goal?
That's absolutely our goal. That's what we had worked to on day one. And I would say conceivably what I testified to is that by this time next year, certainly by end of summer of next year, we would have converted what was a gathering system to a distribution system served from our transmission line just south of Lewistown.
Great answer. That'll help cut down on the corrosion. I encourage those that are listening in Winifred, if they would like a hearing, to work with my staff on one. And I would love to invite MCC and Northwestern to that hearing and encourage it. In fact, work that out with my staff. With that, we have no questions. Would like to have some recross somewhere.
Excuse me, no recross. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have some very brief redirect.
Please.
Then we can break for lunch. Mr. Merkel, can you tell the commission who Keith Conroy is?
No.
Are you aware, Mr. Merkel, that there was a former employee who did volunteer his time between the appointment of the receiver and the leaving of the executive and Northwestern's taking over operation of this.
Yes, he actually worked with one of my staff and showed him much of the things that I shared with you today. He gave us a lead on anything that we didn't validate. So yes, I can. I just can't tell you much about his background other than he was associated with Sleepy Hollow.
Okay. Vice Chair Johnson had asked you about the $3,900. I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that your math and the projects that you identified in NWE 6, those are operational costs only, right?
That's correct.
Are abandoned wells inherently unsafe if they are disconnected from the natural gas system?
They could be. They could still leak around surface casing. You know, there's requirements of what they do when they drill them in order to assure that gas wells don't leak to the atmosphere around casing, those type of things. So yeah, there are, you're certainly taking on a risk by taking on those wells.
And is that why, in your opinion, the Montana DEQ has a program to deal with abandoned wells?
Absolutely.
Mr. Merkel, would a requirement to acquire the wells be a deal breaker for Northwestern?
In my mind, it would be.
Commissioner O'Donnell had mentioned a profit motivation for Northwestern, and perhaps that wasn't the only driver of this application. In your opinion and experience, is there a profit motivation in this acquisition?
Absolutely none. There was no profit at all in any of the analysis we did. We're just hoping profusely we can cover our risk and our cost exposure to our customers and also to our company and our shareholders.
Final question. As a matter of due diligence and getting to President Brown's question about enforcement and compliance, it is a lot of your understanding of the compliance matters to date. Was that work done in cooperation with commission staff?
I really don't know that. I haven't talked to commission staff to get their understanding of what they were aware of and what they weren't aware of. I certainly was aware that they were concerned about they didn't have the records and that they weren't in compliance.
And I apologize for my inartful question. Let me ask it a little bit differently. Have you worked with the commission staff to develop what are your understanding of what needs to be done to bring Sleepy Hollow into compliance?
I have not yet worked with the staff. No. We've just recently actually, in preparation for this hearing, developed that, and we just haven't had the time.
All right. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you. I temporarily excuse this witness. We will now take lunch recess. For the record, the time is 12:33. Let's resume at 1:30. Thank you.